people together and in a couple of weeks. Could the governor just say tonight she can have the seat?
Yeah, because he has to sign off on it.
Yeah, maybe if that, if the Attorney General says he can do that, just do it tonight, so she can be there Tuesday to get going. Rather than go through the process, which is, you know, the end result. Ready? Yes. Good evening. Welcome to the November 20th study session of Leavenworth City Commission. We've got 4 things on the agenda. First item is review political sign regulations and the development regulation. It's chapter 8 of our development regulations. I'll let the commission know I put this on the calendar. I actually put it in the calendar probably in September, so we were going to do it on election night. I wasn't here because of knee surgery, but it's the first time coming up, and one of the things because of, I don't want to say the debacle that went on with political signs this year, but after the primaries were over, you know, do we take down the sign, we put them back up, what's the length that you can have the signs up? I think most of us here, I think most of the commissioners, if not all the commissioners, always thought that the city regulation was 45 days prior to the election. And we all had assumed that, and that is the county regulation, but when we look into our regulations, we didn't have a time frame. So I asked to put this on so that we can decide what type of time frame we might have. Plus there's some other things that Mr. Kramer, probably Ms. Hurley, would like to speak about. So I'll give it to you, Mr. Kramer. Ms. Hurley? Yeah,
and Julie Hurley, our city planner, will start and talk about that time before the elections, and then we just have a few other items we'll just give the commission and the public some information on.
Yep. So basically how our regulations are stated now, you're correct, there is no time limit before elections that people can put them up, so theoretically as soon as you decide you're running you could put one up. So right now political signs are allowed in any area in the city except for the right-of-way. We do not allow them in the right-of-way. In commercial or industrial areas, they can be up to 32 square feet, which is kind of a standard 8x4. That's a common size that we see. In residential areas, they can't be larger than 3 square feet, which is going to be your standard yard sign size that you do see. They can't be placed where they interfere with intersection sight distances or driveways, and they cannot be put on utility poles or any other public property or structures. And then they do have to be removed within 3 days after the election. Prior to every election, we do send a letter to every candidate that is registered with the county. So not just for local elections, if there's some representative positions or statewide elections, we just kind of get everybody who's on file with the county, and we go ahead and send out a letter to all of their campaign addresses letting them know what our regulations are, and sort of put that burden on them to make sure that their volunteers and staff know the rules in town. Once the signs start appearing, we usually leave them alone, even if they're in the right-of-way, unless they're really egregious, like right on the back of the curb or blocking an intersection, something like that. With this last general election, we only did one day where we went out and pulled signs, political signs. Any political signs that we pull, we do keep up here at City Hall. We don't destroy them, and candidates or their volunteers are able to come pick those up. So this year we didn't issue any violation notices for signs. We don't typically send out violations or citations for those. We did send out a couple of courtesy letters to residential properties that had large signs in their yards. We do see a few of those every year. There were a few more this year than we normally see, but a few of them will have those larger kind of 32 square foot range signs in a residential property. And we just send a letter asking that they remove it and reminding them that they're limited to the 3 square feet. But we don't go on private property to pull those signs, since we have to enforce just from the right-of-way, so we can't go up there and remove those signs. So as I said before, we don't have any regulations in place that restrict how early you can put them out. Like the mayor said, a lot of cities do put a 45-day restriction on that. I've seen a few 30-day restrictions, so if that's something that the commission would like to consider, it's really up to you all how early you would like to put that restriction, and then that's something that we can certainly work with and enforce going forward.
Ms. Hurley, the county has a 45-day restriction.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I know that many people probably here probably think I can't wait till political season starts so they can say, when do I get to start seeing the signs? But that's probably not true. My recommendation is that we go with the county. But I wouldn't be adverse to saying having a 30-day limit, but for ease, to make sure we're all together, we adopt the 45-day rule that the county has.
Yeah, I'm in favor of 45.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Any discussion or?
I would agree with that. The only thing I would bring up is that we talked at one of our meetings, it may have been another study session, about state law on this is pretty wide open, right? Or do
Yeah.
we need to discuss that now, or do we want to wait?
Yeah, I'm gonna bring it up.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I'm comfortable with 45 days.
45 days?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a consensus that we'll go with 45 days, that we'll add that to the
And we can
ordinance.
bring that revision to you pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
And another point I think Mr. Kramer's gonna talk about is, as I understand it, the state, Kansas legislature passed a law last year or two saying, no limits on political signs or something to that effect. Mr. Kramer will get into detail. But the U.S. Supreme Court ruled you can't have separate laws for some signs and not for other signs. So all of them are a form of First Amendment. So if we have limits on signage for advertising, et cetera, political signs have to comply with that. They can't be separate, but Mr. Kramer's got details better than me.
That's roughly the right idea. The state legislature said that you cannot prohibit political signs in the right of way, and the Supreme Court case we're talking about says you cannot discriminate based on content about regulating signs in that way. So the city of Leavenworth City Commission, along with most of the other large cities in the state of Kansas, chose to ignore that state statute granting political signs access to the right of way. It was just a matter of when, not if somebody was going to challenge that, and that happened in the city of Derby. They had a political, somebody who's running for political office in Derby, request from the Attorney General's office an opinion on that, and that's still pending, so that's in the works. As our last item on the agenda tonight, the state legislative agenda, one of our action items is essentially to allow the cities to regulate their right-of-ways, as we always have. The state to get out of the business of telling the cities what they can and cannot do in the right-of-ways, which have always been protected. So we'll go forward with that, and then I'll update the commission as we hear what happens in the Derby case with the Attorney General's opinion in that process. But at this time, the city, I know there was some confusion this time that there were some people who believed we were in violation of state statute by pulling political signs from the right-of-way, and technically that's correct. But the commission, along with more than a dozen other cities in the state of Kansas, have taken that action to continue to control their own right-of-ways.
Yeah, this is the position of the city, and I think this commission, that the U.S. Supreme Court's decision supersedes that of the state legislature.
And the lawyers will work that out.
Yeah, and we'll see how that works out, but that's where we are right now. Any other questions or comments on this?
Is there anything else that needs to be addressed? I know that was the biggest thing.
Consensus, and then we'll just bring that revision.
We talked about the size limits, we'd already established that,
And
3 square feet and 32 square feet in other areas, and I don't know.
And I think the only thing I'd bring up is we did see a lot more of those large signs this time.
That's what I want.
And we sent some courtesy letters this time.
Right.
I think if we see that again the next cycle, we'll probably send violation notices on those big signs. That you still get time, it's not an immediate violation, you have time to abate
Right.
it.
That'd be
But
good.
because we cannot go on private property, those courtesy letters
That's what
don't
I
have
was
much
about.
to them. And you figure, well, if I keep it up 3 more weeks, that's 3 more weeks of exposure, and I haven't even got a real notice yet. So we'll probably move toward formal notices on those larger signs next time around. And in our letter that we send out when the campaign season starts, we'll emphasize those larger signs are not allowed in residential zone districts.
Any other questions, Mr. Griswold?
No.
Okay, next item.
The consensus to 45 days?
Yes, we did have
It'll
consensus.
come back to the commission,
Yes,
it's gotta go
we'll-
through the
we'll-
process.
Yeah.
I do have one other thing. If there's a sign that interferes with the, at an intersection or something like that, with the flow of traffic in either direction, and I mean, we as a commissioner can bring that to the attention of the city manager
Yes.
or any of the,
Yep.
it's not the primary thing of the police, but if they're doing a patrol and they see that it's a safety concern.
If you just let any of us know, staff can go out and pull it. If it's an
And we only did the one
Yeah.
big sweep, but we continuously pull those type of signs
Yeah,
throughout the
if they're
process.
Okay,
interfering
alright.
with vision.
That's all.
And I think Public Works, a lot of times you see these houses, we buy junk houses, you know, whatever those are. Some, I don't know who puts those out.
Yeah, we pulled those too.
And those always get
Yeah.
pulled.
A lot of times those will get pulled, in the mowing process,
Yeah.
mowing the right of way,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, next item is the rental inspection program. We say an update, but we, probably don't have anything to update. I think it's the discussion that we're gonna start tonight. Now, allow Mr. Kramer to start, or you want me to introduce it?
I can start,
Go ahead.
unless you would like to. I think we're gonna, look at this through the lens of a rental property program, because we've talked about inspection, we've talked about mediation, we've talked about licensing, we've sort of talked about all the aspects that are involved in this. And what we've sort of done is try to, what we want to do tonight is get from the commission not a focused direction, but a more general direction, eliminate some items so that we can then focus on kind of where we want to go. And I think in talking with Julie over and over, I think one of the first things that this commission needs to decide is whether you're interested in a licensing program or not, and then work backwards from that. And here's why I say that. Looking at a licensing program, it's the most important decision. The infrastructure, resources, and staffing to create something like that is substantial. It is the ultimate leverage and enforcement mechanism, and you could work backwards from that. Otherwise, if we weren't to go with the licensing, we would have to find how enforcement would happen, how we would make this administratively work for the city. We can do that through administrative fines and fees, work with municipal court, work with the city attorney to come up with a number of ways to enforce the program that we come up with. But I think the first step, and I don't want to talk about cost, we've talked about, or we can talk about cost, but I don't want cost to be an issue. We've talked about doing this at a very nominal fee, you know, less than, the mayor and I talked about, you know, $20, $25, but then if, no more than 100, even if you have 150 units for all of them combined. But if you start with that fee, then you can escalate all the way up to the ultimate leverage of license, removing the license. Again, this isn't going to affect most of the rental properties or landlords in town, but I think that's the first thing the commission needs to discuss and talk about, is whether we want to go that direction. I know it sounds like license or not is just a small discussion, but the creation and maintenance of that is probably going to necessitate a part-time staff person in the clerk's office for the letters, the registrations, the database maintenance, and all those aspects, and we can do that, but I think that's probably where we'd like to start, and then we can talk a little bit about mediation, the program, the life safety issues that Commissioner Dedeke brought up last time. We've talked about those items.
The discussion I know that the city manager and I have had on this, and for all of us to then take part in, is if we went, the rental licensing would be every landlord or every property owner that has a property for rent would apply or be required to have a license. And that license fee, and once again, nothing locked in at all. Let's say you own between 1 and 5 properties, it's $50 total, not $50 a property. If you have 6 and above, maybe it's $100 total. And then that gives you the license to practice, to be a landlord, to rent your house, whatever, rent your properties. If then we have to set up some mediation, and there is a system right now where people can, tenants can make complaints to, what is the name?
Welcome Central.
Welcome Central.
Welcome Central, and I don't know if that's necessarily the right place for that to be in the future. It used to be with Catholic Charities when it first started, how long ago when we started?
Before I started.
At least 10, 15 years ago, Catholic Charities handled it, then with the changeover in management, Catholic Charities, they came to us and said, we really don't want to be in the rental mediation business. And Sister Vicky, the saint that she is, says, let me handle it. But I can't speak for her, but she is very, very busy with Welcome Central and homeless issues and things now. But back to the licensing thing. If each landlord has a license and if tenants start making complaints, obviously we're going to have to get into some type of mediation. Is this a complaint that needs to be rectified, and go to the landlord and say, you know, you have a commode that doesn't work, a shower doesn't work or something like that, please fix it. If it doesn't happen, I guess we have to put some teeth into it. How many times can that happen until we take, for lack of a better term, I don't want to use that term, but at what point do we remove the licensing? You cannot rent a house, be a landlord in this town for a period of a year, 6 months, whatever it might be. Obviously, I don't think we take that lightly just because somebody's door handle's off and they didn't get it fixed in a week. I mean, it'd have to be a series of steps before we institute that removal of the license. But that's one of the thoughts. I'm not saying that's what I'm proposing or anything, but that's the thought of a licensing. Because there have been other thoughts about inspections, going into the house and inspecting each house before it's rented. And I think we've heard from plenty of landlords how that, I mean, we'd almost require a staff of, in my opinion, 20-some people that have to be able to react on the, you know, on a dime, especially in the June time frame. We have approximately 10,000 rooftops in this town, and what is it, 48% of them are rentals.
I think we're at 51.
Yeah, we're a little
51,
over
call it
50%.
51. We have
Yeah.
10,000 rooftops in this town, 5,100 houses are rentals. So if we had an inspection program where before they could rent it, we'd have to inspect it. You know, how much staff would you have to do 5,100 and to do it in a timely fashion? Landlords are business people. When a property comes open, if they have a renter that wants to go in there, we shouldn't be in a place that we stop their business. And having, in my opinion, having an inspection program before they're allowed to rent, unless we can guarantee that we'll be there within a 2-hour time frame, within 24 hours, I think it just stifles business too much. Those are some of my thoughts, but I'm sure the rest of the commissioners have some thoughts too. Let's go ahead, Commissioner Dedeky.
I've got some concerns that, I'd say out of the 5,100 rental homes, there's probably 5%, maybe just a few percent more that are actually the problem. So why are we punishing all the good landlords up front without anything else? This $50 to $100 fee, I think, is ridiculous. I don't know if this is annually or one fee for the length of the time that they're in business or what. What we don't need to attack the good landlords. We need to work with the poor landlords. And I agree with Paul that we don't need to do an internal inspection, because anything that's generated that we say, well, you gotta fix this, you gotta fix this, you gotta fix this, it's all gonna get passed on to the consumer. And these consumers can't afford what they're living in to start with. Secondly, you've got the people that take no regard of rental property. Broadway and Spruce is the ideal. The last 2 weeks, that little red apartment house has had 2 to 3 truckloads of junk sitting out there for the city to haul away. These are people that just walked away from their apartments. You know, so the landlords, it's a two-way street, you know. We don't understand what they do, why they do it, and vice versa, I think. But I'm totally opposed to the annual fees. Like I'd suggest going back to the basics and then work up if you have to. It's harder to work down, you know that as well as I do. If we come in and establish fees, you're never going to get rid of them. The fees are never going to take care of the cost.
The purpose behind if you're gonna have an actual annual license, then the purpose behind the fee is the incentive to come in and do it. Because if you have a rental property and you don't come in and again, the fee, you know, we're talking about $50 for not per unit or anything like that, or you know, if you have 150 units, 100 total for the year, is that at that point landlords who weren't abiding by coming in, providing contact information, property management information, all this tenant information, then you could have you could accelerate that for that less than 5% to late fees. You haven't registered, a failure to register fee, and at that point you're in violation of city ordinance. Again, less than 5%, but we have a registration now that doesn't have an annual process to it, and we have a list that is functionally obsolete the year after it started. So without that requirement to have every year, you don't have a functional list, and you don't have a way to get to landlords who have one or two properties who aren't complying. But you could go the other way and not do the list, and that's what we kept bumping into with designing the program, is you either have to know designing the program whether you're working off a license-based system or a non-license-based system, for us to start working on a program with what we talked about.
I have no problem with the license, I have a problem with the fees.
And you could set the fees at $10, but I think it's important to have a number so that at some point you could make sure everybody was doing in compliance.
We have 5,100 houses, we're not gonna make 5,100 times 50. That's,
No, if you've got a lot of landlords that's got well over 100 units.
yeah, I mean, we probably make, it's not,
No, it's not.
not a, I don't wanna say money-making thing, but,
It's
you're not
in
gonna do
place.
anything, but
It's an inventory of having
Places.
situational awareness of
Yeah.
5,100 properties in terms of the fact that they have tenants or citizens living in these properties. And for me, I do think a rental property program is the proper term, and it consists of two, maybe sub-programs. And I think actually the most important one in terms of where I was coming from was kind of a landlord and tenant complaint resolution program. To me, and I know I have great confidence in 80, 85, 90% of our landlords. It's not to be draconian or to hold a hammer over their heads, but we know that there are citizens in the city who are in situations in their rental properties where their safety, health, and welfare is very questionable. And I would like a more definitive, and for the city to take over that process of some steps. And I know that Commissioner Dedeke talked last time we talked about this, about 6 things that if we did need an internal inspection as a result of a complaint, I'm not saying that's the first step. I mean, it'd be nice if the landlord and the landlord could fix the problems, but if we did, there were 6 things that he mentioned that I thought were reasonable in terms of internal. The only thing that I would add would be maybe, looking at insects and rodents, and I don't know about bed bugs. I know bed bugs have been a problem with some of the structures, and that's probably a little blame on both sides in terms of the landlord, but the tenants, who are living in those properties. But I think it would be hard to implement that program if we don't have a licensing program, just so we know who the players are. You can't tell the players without a program, the players in this case being the landlords. And I mean, we do have registration for our security alarms, our pets, and things like that. And I think that I'm not looking at large fees, and I don't think we should get bogged down tonight in talking the specifics of fees, but that's what I think. And then it adds some accountability, the licensing, some teeth to a program where we would have a landlord-tenant resolution program that would let the staff work out the processes and the steps to implement that program. And we'd be focusing on the quality of life of all the citizens in the city.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of the licensing program, because without the licensing, I don't know how you'll be able to hold the landlords accountable, especially those few that are out there that are constantly in violation. Because I know without the licensing program, if we just allow them to continue to rent, without any violations, and they're just forcing these individuals to live in these unlivable homes, I just think that it's not fair to the citizen who may be, low income. As I said, so I think that we definitely need to implement something, and so that way we can definitely hold those landlords accountable that's in violation.
What I like about the licensing program is, one, we have a good inventory and people have to register every year. There's actually a system in place right now for landlord and tenant resolution. I don't know how many actually use it. If a tenant has a horrible situation, they can go to Sister Vicky for a mediation program. I don't know how many people actually know that it is, but I mean, there is a system in place, but it's realistically, it's probably not being used very often. If we have a rental licensing program, each landlord would probably be given a certificate I'm probably not like the good housekeeping seal of approval, but something like that, that they can say that we're, you know, a licensed landlord within the city of Leavenworth. But I do believe then we'd have to bring in that mediation or that,
I don't think it's a mediation.
it's probably an
I think it's a-
arbitration or, you know,
It's a
that
resolution.
complaint- The resolution, that's a good
Resolution.
word, yeah. Resolution in-house that somebody, hope it wouldn't come up to the city commission level, but, you know, the city manager would dictate, probably someone in Ms. Hurley's office, or, to handle something like that. But I don't want it to be a handcuff, of the landlords, but I think potentially it can work that the 95% of the good landlords will actually profit from it, because hey, we're clean, and the 5% that are not, if we, let's say they're in violation, we can actually disallow them from being a landlord, have rental property in the city for a period of time until they correct the problems. But it can't handcuff the landlords that we have now. It has to be a two-way street.
Do we have a list of the landlords in town?
We had a list that we put out 10 years,
2008,
10 years ago.
there was a
told-
one-time.
Yeah, and it
That's-
hasn't been updated since.
It
As I
hasn't
said, we
been
don't know.
enforced since then. And one thing I will add, we heard from some property managers last time, and this is something that code enforcement runs into just with our exterior code enforcement activities. When we have a rental, and we only have contact for a property owner, a lot of times they're out of town, whether it's, you know, Kansas City or Pennsylvania, and that's the only contact information we have. And so it's really hard to work with those individuals to resolve issues, but with a licensing and registration, if we had information about their local property managers,
Yes.
which most of them do have, we just don't know who they are, that would be a lot more quicker and efficient way for us to work through issues without having to elevate them and leave people in situations that could maybe otherwise easily be resolved.
And we do have some property managers that are very good about coming in and updating their information.
Sure.
But there are not that many,
Yeah.
but some of them are very good about coming in and updating the information.
So we are in favor of a licensing program?
Well, I think, well, okay, well, I would say I am in favor of a rental property program consisting of two sub-programs, or whatever you want to call it, a licensing program and a tenant, a landlord-tenant resolution, conflict resolution process. I know that's a mouthful.
We have that now, but you're saying change it.
But Mark, I would say,
Yeah,
I'm
we
sorry,
don't
Mayor,
really, it's
Mr. Mayor,
it's non-binding.
It's mediation and it's not working. I
Yeah.
mean, Sister Vicky sent us all of us, I think, an email about 5 or 6, and I had some personal, experience with that with, one of my adult sons a few years ago, and, it's necessary, I think, in terms of some citizens who kind of live on the edge in terms of their financial acumen, and so I think that process and city taking over that process is important, and hopefully it won't have to be used all that much, but, you know, the processes and the regulations, that was part of our packet here. I thought there was some good language in there that would need to be updated, you know, in terms of implementation of the program, but, that's what I'm in favor of.
Okay. How about, obviously we've got, I believe we have some landlords out here, property owners. I don't think many of you meant to spend your Tuesday night down here for no other reason. Well, one or two of you to come up and just give us your thoughts. I don't know if you have a spokesperson already assigned, but let's hear from one or two of you. And I'm willing to hear from more than one or two of you, as long as it's not everyone saying the same thing.
She up.
All right. Hang on just a second. I need to get something going here. Okay, I'm sorry. What is your name, ma'am?
Kathleen Laguerre.
You gotta say it slower and louder.
Kathleen Laguerre. Can you spell that?
Yeah.
Egare.
Okay.
I'm not a landlord, but I came to the commission some weeks ago with a problem regarding a landlord-tenant issue. I think this sounds in theory like a great program. My question being, how is licensing going to address the issues that are not being enforced now? But if code enforcement cannot do anything about this now, who's going to be enforcing the landlord
What
licensing?
specifically are you
You're talking
talking
about the bug issue?
Yeah, among other things, bug issues, trash issues, junkers, type of things.
Code enforcement only handles the outside of the property. We are not, code enforcement or people from the city are not allowed inside a property unless they're invited by the tenant.
So will
if
that
they don't,
then,
if they can't knock on the door and say, we need to inspect. If the tenant invites us, or the landlord, am I correct, landlord or the tenant? What if?
It's the legal occupant. Is-
Okay, whoever's the occupant, which would be the tenant, they have to say, raise their hand and say, I need some help here, will you come in and look at it? But we can't legally go into a house without
Understood.
an invitation.
understood. But then my question being, which I think she kind of raised, there's a lot of good landlords I'm sure will register. The questionable ones, what's going to be done to enforce if either they don't register or they're, doing it under the table or not keeping things up to par, then what is going to happen? Because that's the real problem right now, is those ones
What would
that not
happen
the
there,
rest.
if we did a rental licensing program, is we'd require all landlords to, sign up and receive their license. Yes, there will be some people trying to game the system. We won't send out people saying who's doing it, but the word will get out. Small enough town, other landlords will say, Joe Schmidlap over here who runs terrible properties, doesn't license, they're out of control, then we can go out and say, you're not licensed, and we'd have to go through the administrative judicial process on, fining them or telling them they, have 2 weeks to get their license. If they don't, we go with administrative procedures through the city court system, I'm guessing, something like that.
Well, you would design it, but you got
We'd have to put
basically
some
most
teeth
of
into it.
Right,
Yeah.
any violation of a city ordinance ends up in municipal court.
Yeah.
So
Well-
you design the steps about notification, right to, 30 days to comply, this commission designs that ordinance.
Well,
That's
this-
where ordinances end
Ms.
up.
Laguerre, will this be a panacea? Will this solve every problem? Absolutely not. But it might be a step in getting it. And I think some of the people that are egregious in their violations, it could take care of them. I don't want it, I don't think anybody here, the commissioners want those good landlords to be handcuffed by this.
Right, and I think absolutely we need some system in place, but the problem being is the ones who do not comply, is that then they're going to put a further financial strain on the residents who are most likely low income.
That's one thing that we
and
can't
be
control.
condemning houses or that type of thing.
Yeah, the market will control that. We cannot say, if this house is now renting for $600, and they start making complaints, and they say, and it's now $750. That's, unfortunately, I don't think that we have any control over that. I have this pen right here. I've got it for sale. I want $1,000 for it. How many people are willing to give me $1,000 for it? Somebody might be willing to give me a dime for it, but the market, in my opinion, has to take care of that. And those things may happen, are probably, quite frankly, probably will happen. But I don't know that we, as government, can control what a business person charges for their product.
That wasn't my question, my question was about residents being displaced by that, or what then would happen if there is, low-income residents who landlord's not complying, then what? Because that's then displacing them, so I just mean to keep in mind that.
We need to keep that, we need to think about that as we build
Because we don't want them to be the ones,
put these steps
paying for
into
that.
some type of ordinance, right? I mean, that'll have, there's
So we're
those
actually,
details.
yeah, we're in the building stage right now. Yeah, so overall, like I said, if you got a landlord who's not keeping up on his property, the main goal I'm thinking for us is eventually they won't be able to rent in the city of Leavenworth. So that's like the ultimate goal I'm
But I
guessing.
think our concern is what's happened to the displaced
tenant.
people.
Well, I'll tell you
We want
what.
people
I-
displaced because their license is revoked.
Yeah, but they
Yeah.
needed, but under what we're talking about, they need to be displaced because there's a safety problem, there's a health problem, or there's a welfare problem. But you're right, when we do need to, figure out
We're gonna end
that
up
part of
with
it.
people at the Sister Vicky's,
Yeah. And, here,
because there's no place for them to go.
yeah, here's, something that could happen. Let's say somebody takes a sledgehammer to their commode, or they flush 3 towels down the toilet and jam up, what that can do to the plumbing. And there's landlords out here, and I don't know if there's a plumber there, but there's a $750 call probably, if they do it. And it still is the responsibility of the landlord to replace that commode and fix that plumbing. But I think the landlord say, you're doing that, your rent just went from $500 to $650 because, you're doing that, or evict them. And that's, that's the reality of situations that happen. But even if a tenant, I could be wrong here, even if a tenant takes a sledgehammer to all the commodes in the house, and then they call us and say, hey, my commodes don't work. And we go in there and we see that, they don't have any commodes. We would call the landlord and say, you gotta fix these commodes. And I'm sure the landlord said, I know, I will fix those commodes, but you're out on your ear, or you're gonna pay it. I mean, that'd be a reasonable thing to do. If I was a business person that my product that I was selling is property, I'm not getting a fair price for it, and I'm raising my price. So, I don't know if that, but your points, as
Yeah, those
Mr. Wilson and Commissioner Griswold, and we've all said, are well taken. We can't just willy-nilly go and say, oh, we're gonna have a licensing program, answers all the questions. There are so many questions.
Yeah,
This is gonna be a process.
We really have to kind of think that through and talk about what the options would be, because we don't want to add to the homeless population, but I recognize that's a challenge that we'll have to kind of talk back
Would
and
it
forth on
possibly be-
with respect to what those last few steps are, if in
Right,
fact.
and, I mean, if they didn't do a city licensing program, would it possibly be able to add certain, codes or ordinances that would then, apply to them, rather than blanketing every landlord, as you said?
There's lots of different options, and Julie and I have talked a little bit about this. The city could make all the certified or licensed rental properties available on our website, so you could tell who is certified and who is not. You could do a lot of what Commissioner Dedeke indicated and put in the ordinance, the 7 things that the city commission that are part of this ordinance. When you write a new ordinance, you can do anything like that. We could, for somebody who's gonna be displaced, I know over at the Housing Authority, we have a list of all the apartment complexes in town. If somebody was in charge of this mediation, they could maintain a database of licensed realtors and apartment complexes in-house to give information. Is it gonna get somebody in somewhere? No, but it's gonna be a resource of information. But yes, we could do things like in the ordinance, put these items must be in working condition or they'd be in violation of the ordinance, something like that.
Once again, I know we're not gonna solve this evening. This is gonna be a process, and it's gonna be, I don't know how long of a process, but it's gonna be laborious. And we're gonna take input from all sides and determine, this commission will have to determine how they go forward with it.
Can I ask Ms. Laguerre one other thing, very quickly, because last time you were here, you talked about a situation on an adjacent home, right? Where, did you see, and you saw evidence of these problems? It wasn't something that the tenant was complaining about, correct?
No.
So that'll have to be, in terms of our steps, that'll have to be kind of addressed too, in terms of how that will be handled.
And that's why I ask about city ordinances, because a lot of times in these, some properties and people renting in these conditions, sometimes it's not a concern of theirs, but it is a concern to neighboring communities.
Yes.
And so, in that, I feel it is the city's responsibility to protect those around it, even if you had a landlord tenant. That's not gonna help the problems that we're trying to deal with, or me specifically,
But what I'm
trying
suggesting
to
is,
deal
under
with,
that
so I just
circumstance,
don't
I
see
would
that.
be open in terms of how the ordinance is structured and written, is that this could be brought to the attention, should be brought to the attention of the city. I don't know exactly what we would do. It's a little different than the tenant complaining, but I don't think we should preclude, you know, somebody like you that, you know, saw this happening and it's affecting the properties next door to the property that's causing all the problems. Because there were some external things that were happening, right?
Right, and last time I was told, the city is limited on the things that they can enforce,
Right.
but I don't see that this program addressing those issues either, because the residents in those properties are not interested in addressing them. So
Well-
what then are you going to do for the surrounding properties who still have these issues?
I don't have an answer for you tonight, but I think we'll look at it holistically, because I remembered when you talked to us 2 months ago about that, you know, in terms of.
Yep, she the second person in a month that complained
Right,
about this.
right, and you're not the tenant, but obviously we want to keep, our city in as good a condition as we possibly can, and, I mean, if there's complaints from neighbors that, from a particular, I think we need to at least address that, talk about it, and see whether that would be part of our ordinance. Because it's not as straightforward as the tenant complaining about a certain situation like mold or something like that, but to me, it gets to the overall quality of life within the city.
Right, and I think that's more of the issue that maybe needs to be looked at, rather than landlords being in compliance, because a lot of those, you know, people have the option, not always economically have the option to rent anywhere, but to go to another landlord. But, you know, I don't have the option who my landlord next door rents it out to. So there really needs to be something in place for those around, to protect them, because those citizens deserve to have a peaceful and safe home as well.
Safe, right, healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You're not coming up?
Let me go first.
Oh.
Okay, my name is Kevin Albee. I am the landlord of the A&K Rentals. We have about 130 units here in Leavenworth and Lansing. The first thing I wanted to address, based on just some of the comments that just happened, under the Kansas Landlord Tenant Act, there are already a lot of rules in place on how we have to handle doing repairs, etc. And you should be very aware of those. And one of the examples is if tenants run around the apartment busting up commodes and we have to repair them, we can charge the tenants directly for them.
Sure.
And we have 30 days to complete repairs. Actually, to make a good faith effort to complete repairs.
Right.
And sometimes certain repairs are gonna take time. If a furnace blows up and we have to order parts, it might take 2 or 3 weeks to repair something. So many landlords will make an effort, and I've had the sister called because I didn't have someone have a hot water heater working in 3 days because it was going to take a week to get the new hot water heater in. And it's not always that we're not trying to do something. Sometimes someone's impatient. When you're talking about the mediation, and you made the comment about it won't be too many people or it won't be a huge thing, honestly, I think that is going to be the hugest thing that you will see. Once people realize there's a mediation thing, you're going to have a huge number of complaints, and 99% of them are going to be from disgruntled tenants that are mad at a landlord because the landlord didn't do something they wanted, even though they knew that it shouldn't be done. So 90% of what you're going to be doing is dealing with tenants trying to get landlords in trouble, whether they're good landlords or bad landlords. So that is going to be a full-time position, and maybe 2 people. It is going to be a huge hassle for you. So don't think it's going to be something minor. It's going to be huge.
But, Mr. Albee, do we have that much now? Or is it just because the Sister Vicky's program is not advertised as much? People don't know about it.
It's because Sister Vicky's 100% voluntary, and when Sister Vicky has called me and I've explained this is what's going on, it's been dropped because she knew that I wasn't going to participate. And other landlords knew the same thing. With the city program and a license is on the line, I won't have that option to tell Sister Vicky.
Is there anything on, I mean, in terms of, and I don't disagree with you, and I think initially that there would be that, but in terms of how we would enforce the program, certainly,
someone
would
makes a
hope
complaint-
over time that the number of tenants taking that action in terms of being disgruntled would be reduced. But do you have any ideas on how we could, deal with that initially with?
The only thing I could think is that,
And if you don't now, it's something.
I don't have an idea
Right.
off the top of my
Right.
head.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
would.
that you'd find a way to reduce it.
Yep.
There might be something you could do. It is something that I fear is going to be a huge hassle. And it's gonna be one of those things, if you have a complaint, it has to be investigated. I mean, if code enforcement says, if gas company says, someone say they smell gas, they have to go in the house and check for gas.
Right.
So many of our programs that were similar to this have put the onus at first on the tenant. So your complaint form that you would have to fill out to file the complaint could be one that requires you to put in quite a bit of work. On the CDBG program, you have to get your own quotes, 3 quotes for your work. You have to call the contractor, schedule the times. So you could create a process where the tenant would have to do some work. And a lot of times that weeds out somebody calling and say, I have a complaint, this. You can say, you have a form, a multi-page form, fill out, be descriptive, and if you haven't filled that form all the way out, we're not taking your complaint. There are a number of those if we decide to do this. And I agree, I'm not interested in entertaining frivolous claims on my time or your time. So we could design something that, it's not gonna stop all of them, but that requires some effort.
Now, the
part of
basic
tenant.
idea, and that would be wonderful, and that was a huge concern.
Yeah.
The second issue, the idea of having a license to be a landlord, I don't on the surface oppose that. Even a nominal fee, $25, $50 a year to do it. I'm not against that. I'm not for it, but I can see the need for something like that. I don't necessarily think that is what needs to be done. I think that this registration program can do a lot of the same things if it were structured differently, if it was made so that it was mandatory, and if you didn't register, it had teeth in it. Where the people, because initially, when we set this up, I was part of the original committee that would put this together. It was to be mandatory. You had to come in and register. You had to list all of your properties, list any changes. It was required, and if you didn't, there was supposed to be some kind of $150 fine that you paid.
Some consequence.
There was a consequence, and it never got imposed on anyone. And you had 2 weeks and they were supposed to notify you if people found out that you didn't do it. And a new landlord that bought a single house had to come in and notify them. And while there was a $25 charge each time, the one time you did it, and then you could do changes, and I don't know if there was a fee each time you did changes. But it wasn't unreasonable. But you were required to, and if you didn't, there was a $150 fine for not doing so. So there's already teeth in it without it actually being a license. So it exists. It just never got enforced. So if we do a license now with a $25 fee a year and it doesn't get enforced, how is it different from what we have?
But we don't have an ordinance right now on.
No, it's already there. It exists.
Okay.
Just not being.
The
enforced.
ordinance
Just never
says
been enforced.
the fee is $150 per day.
That's a good point.
Per day, if you
So-
fail to
register.
Register.
So
And
if
Well, we
somebody,
can
if
get a lot of
we
roads
find,
fixed real quick.
Yeah.
Let's get those people.
And you have to, I think part of that is having the staff, and we're not, I don't think we're talking about growing the staff a lot, but you have to have the wherewithal in place to enforce the program
Right.
before you even say go, that we're gonna do
And so,
something new.
it exists.
I agree it exists.
And would a license be that much different than
The
what
register.
already exists? And if so, how? So I think that's the big issue you really need to look at. How would a license be different than this, and in what way?
I think the way, right now, and I'm not saying this is what I'm for or what's gonna happen, A license would be, the way it'd be different is if they violate the rules enough times, whatever those times are,
They lose the
they
license.
lose a license and you're not allowed to be a renter, a landlord in this town. And if they do that, then we take them through the court system. Right now, we just have the registration. And we call maybe we just change the name of the registration to a license, but we put some other parts into it that, that we can have the ability to revoke a license. And I don't want to be a person up here with a hammer revoking licenses, you know, every day because that's great fun. But for those 2 or 3% of the homes that possibly do need to have their license, the landlords have the license revoked, in order to get them in line to have adequate housing, I think that might be necessary.
I cannot deny that there are some slumlords in this town.
Right, every
And I would
town
love to
probably
see them
has.
go.
Yeah,
And
it
there
could
is
be,
not an enforcement arm to get rid of them.
right,
I really don't have anything to add, I just wanted to point out that we did have an existing, it does have teeth in it, just has never been enforced, and that the mediation could be a nightmare.
right.
I would see the licensing as accomplishing registration and more.
Right.
The registration is essentially about creating a database.
Yeah, that's.
The
we
licensing
did
creates a
10 years
database
ago.
And
and
accountability
more.
and some.
Well, and the
accountability.
final fear of a lot of landlords, and this is gonna be 100% honest, is once the licensing is in place, is it going to escalate into the inspections and everything else? Is it going to become a monster on our backs
That's
that,
not our intent.
just like we were told we were going to have the sewer fee, and it's like, okay, we need to do the improvement on the sewers. Well, this effectively gave me approximately an $8,000 increase in my taxes, 30% jump. 30% jump on my property taxes. Well, that just took a quarter of my expected income for the year and flushed it down the toilet. I can't afford another one of those. I couldn't afford that.
And why 30%? Because of the number of
Well,
rental?
no, $84 per unit came to 30% increase in my property taxes. One property, 514 South 7th Street, that property has 29 units. Its taxes before this was $7,000. After was almost 12.
How many rooftop, how many?
29 units.
Well, it shouldn't be that, because it should be, about $2,400 increase, not
Well,
$5,000
they
increase.
listed an extra, I've had to appeal because they listed it 8 extra units. So.
Okay, but it'd be 29 times 84.
But it still
And
came
I'm
out-
not trying to,
If it was done to the correct amount, it'd still be a 32% increase in taxes. And that's the way it was across the board. That is huge.
yeah.
And we plan on relooking at the
We're,
fees
we're,
in
we're,
March.
yeah, we're gonna, that's one we're gonna overlook, look at the whole fee thing after implementation.
And again, I wasn't
But-
intending
no,
to
but
bring that
that's
up,
fine,
that was
but
just-
it's,
We're
but it-
afraid that the
right.
license, once the license is
Yeah.
in place, if the fee starts at 25, well, a year
Yeah.
later, it could be 75, then it could be 25 a unit, then it could be, before we know it, we're looking at another 30% increase in our costs.
Yeah. And I completely understand that. I completely understand your concern there, and I can't speak for the other 3 gentlemen here, and Commissioner Batter's absent this evening. I don't think that's the intent, but I understand how that can be the fear, the galloping government that says it is a money grab. It is not the intent here at all. It's in the intent, what do we need to do? And this, once again, is a starting point this evening, and that's why we welcome all of you to be here, because it has to be a two-way street.
Thank you for hearing my
thank
comments.
you, thank you.
Sir, how are you coming up, Ms. Pierce?
Ronald Pamper.
What's your last name, sir, Ronald?
Pamper, yeah, like the diapers with an L on it.
Okay.
Oh,
I'd like to reinforce something that A&K Reynolds said. As far as mediation goes, the Kansas Landlord Tenant Act empowers a district judge to be the mediator.
is that a mediator or the arbitrator?
That he actually, if a tenant has a problem such as, I think Mr. Dedeky mentioned a non-working sewer.
Yeah.
Under Kansas law, you can take the landlord to court, say, this stuff isn't functioning, Judge, and I want to be released from my lease. And the judge will allow that.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's not a mediation. Mediation is when you get two people together and say, well,
That-
can't we
well,
all
that-
just get along and?
Well, there's
solve
gonna
the
be
problem?
two people getting together, but there's a decision.
Well,
that
somebody has to
happens.
make a decision, so that's the,
Right.
he's gonna be the arbitrator.
You have two extraordinary judges here. Gibbons has done the Landlord-Tenant Act for, God, 15 years. He is now working the criminal docket, and Judge King is doing it. I'd really recommend that people who are unfamiliar with this law read it, and then bring him in and ask him questions about what authorities that the city has, what authorities the tenant has, and versus the landlord. It's really no big secret. I've been a landlord for 29 years. I can't even imagine attempting to force a tenant to stay in a place that is not livable. I don't even understand what the point of it would be. The only thing you draw when you're trying to run property that's that bad, what you're gonna draw are bad tenants, and that will come back to what that young lady said back there. The neighborhood starts acting up and saying, Jesus Christ, man, why don't you fix this? You have to maintain your property if you're going to get decent people. I mean, it's just, as you said, good business. One thing you might be able to do in working with the county court system is if a tenant goes in and takes me to court, for example, because my sewer line hadn't been working for 40 days. And the judge renders the judgment, you're released, you get your deposit back, you know, pack it out, you're free to leave. That your lease is vacated. Maybe he could send this city a notification that this decision has been made and that that building has been rendered not livable. Because the tenant's gonna have to prove it.
Right.
I mean, he's gonna have to show up with pictures or whatever he chooses to do. And that will take a lot of the onus off of it. The other thing I would agree with as far as this registration thing, we registered. I think the only thing you really need to do is just, you've got the list of the landlords and their numbers and phone numbers. Call them up. Has anything changed? Are you out of the business? Have you doubled your business? And that way you'll know. The problem you're gonna have is the hip pocket landlords. You've got a military presence here, and these guys come down, and I was military, been there, done that. Buy a house, because they can't get quarters. They get sent to Iraq or Korea or wherever. The wife goes home, and he goes to a rental management property or a realtor or a buddy and says, you know, rent this thing for me until I can get rid of it.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be a lot of that because you've got a lot of officers coming through here.
Yeah, no, it's,
You know, and those guys are gonna be hard to track. Finally, the last thing I would offer to you is this Welcome Center keeps coming up. I've only had one experience with the Welcome Center. And what I would recommend is that whoever is running that show vets whatever complaints that they're getting. And here's what I mean by it. I had one, and of course I was accused of all sorts of terrible things. She got her court date, and then she got a trial at her request. Come find out that these people were wanted in 3 states for fraud, had been evicted 6 times in 2 years, and had been bankrupt twice. Now, I didn't vet them properly. I got glowing reports from his employer, but neither did they. The difference is I paid for my mistake. I hauled them into court. I spent a month taking them to trial and getting rid of them. The public did not pay for that. Under this sort of a system, the public is going to pay for it. You know, if I do something stupid in business, I should have to pay. Okay? It's the way it is. So those are the only things I'd offer to you as far as constructive opinions.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
One other
Thank you.
thing that, not you, you're welcome to say up there, that I think that if we, with this licensing program, some problems that do occur that we could put some teeth in. We could, the police chief's not here, he stepped out, but we could talk with the police chief or the sheriff, and there are probably some landlords in this town who rent to those freelance pharmaceutical salesmen, for lack of a better term. And, you know, and the police chief knows who those are, the police officers do, the sheriff knows who those are, but it's just repetitive. These guys come in, you're paying cash, and it's, the cops are there all the time, and the sheriff's there all the time. That, you know, that's a cancer that we would like to get rid of. And how we, and possibly this could be one of the avenues that could help in identifying and taking care of that problem. It's not gonna solve it. None of these, anything we do here is not gonna be the panacea for everything. This thing is not gonna be completely solved, but maybe we can improve the situation. Ms. Pierce.
I was on the task force. We worked.
Identify yourself again.
Susan Pierce, P-I-E-R-C-E. I was with Kevin and Mike Greenemeyer and city staff on that task force, and we worked on it for months. I just don't know why it wasn't enforced. And I was here last week because you were changing an ordinance for my other business. Right. I just wonder how much we're gonna work on these, because we did this in 2008, and then we got called back, the task force got called back in 2011 because it just always happens. I mean, you get on the Leavenworth Facebook pages and you'll see people complaining about landlords. And Kevin is right. It will just be, you know, everybody's gonna call. When I first was a landlord, I had somebody that was disgruntled, and back then she called the health department. She moved out and said that her heater didn't work, which it did, but I had to go through all of that to show them that the heater did work. You get, tenants get mad at you for anything.
I understand that. And Mr. Kramer's point earlier is saying, Mr. Albee would say 150 properties. And let's say 10% of them are disgruntled, and all of a sudden 10% of them are complaining. He's gonna have to come in for like 10 consecutive days or 10 full days and dispute each one of those. Mr. Kramer's saying, no, what he would envision is, here's what you have to fill out. You have to have details. You can't just call and say, A&K Rentals, my house is dumped at this address, you've got to come out and fix it. And there's a process that puts the onus on them, and then we'd look at it, maybe let the landlord know that we're gonna look at it, and if we determine that there is some credibility with the complaint, then we potentially go forward. I'm just guessing. I don't, because I have no idea how this thing is going to shake out. But is that what you were saying, something to that effect?
Yeah, in order to participate in our program, it's not a right, it's a privilege. You'd have to go through those steps. Otherwise, we could refer them to the Kansas landlord-tenant thing, which is, it's onerous to read. It's expensive to get the process started, find legal representation and all that. So I do believe in setting the bar relatively high for getting those kind of complaints heard, but not so insurmountable. And I know people have mentioned this. The complaints I think that most of them are hearing aren't people who have the resources or the time to read those documents, go to district court, plead their case in front of a judge, and that's no excuse because that's an avenue that they have. But you know, this is something where it's a little more accessible because we're the ones getting the calls.
Also, you touched on it, and we talked about that when we did our original stuff. We had Chief Kitchens in because it would be nice if there would be something that would help the landlords. I mean, it's always, the state law is so tenant protective, and we hardly have any rights. it would be nice if we could be alerted, you know, if we had a unit that had police calls, you know, 5 times last month. We don't always know. And so then you start getting other tenants that are unhappy because this is going on. So I don't remember what came of that. I mean, that would be a huge job for them to let us know, even if we were registered. So, I mean, that would help. And he's here.
Adam?
Chief?
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Good evening. Yes, that was part of the original sort of concept with the registration portion, is that there was some element of community policing, whereas we were at a particular location a lot. We would solicit the assistance of the landlord to the extent that they would have the ability to help us remedy that problem, and I agree completely that they're very restrictive of what they could do. So from my perspective, from the police department's perspective, I would say that there would be great benefit to the program to provide some way to balance the scale a little bit in favor of the rental property owners. Because I know that there are X number of folks that if we have a problem and we call, we're confident that they're going to do what they can do to help us and them remedy the problem. There is that segment that we're all talking about that I don't make the call because they're not going to do anything. They're not interested in solving that problem. So she's absolutely right. That was the intent. It just never sort of materialized much beyond the list that we had. So that's my sort of comments to that.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the Chief? Anyone else care to speak? Any other ideas that haven't been hit on? We're here to listen. Not seeing any commissioners. What do we do? Obviously, I don't think we're going to solve anything tonight. We know that this is, we have to eat this elephant one bite at a time.
Mr. Dedicated, did you have something before?
I was just gonna say that whatever we do, I would implore you to take your time and do it right the first time.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And go ahead.
With
sir.
the registration program that they had implemented in the beginning, was it one specific person assigned to keep up with the registration, or it just kind of?
As I remember it, and Ms. Williamson can tell us more, it was a database. If you have rental property in town, you're required to come into the clerk's office, list your name, your point of contact, and here are the addresses that I'm managing or I'm the landlord of. Please tell me.
Yeah, the way the program works, when it was implemented in, I want to say 2008, okay, I was going to say 9, okay. There was a period of time that all landlords or anyone having rental property had to come in and register. So the database was created, and we began to enter information in there, but there was no provision in there to re-register each year. It does say that if there are any changes, that they update the city of those changes. And like I said, there are some property managers that are very good about any change, any additions or deletions of their properties, but that's not the norm. And again, we get these one-off where one person has a rental home, and they may or may not come in and put that information in there. But some of them did, so we've got information about a house. It's not as easy as just calling the contact information on there, because it could be disconnected.
Right.
Has it been sold to somebody else? I mean, there's a lot of work, and if that's printed out, it's probably about that thick. Mm-hmm. The information in the database. And again, I know there was some discussion about the $150 fee. It's $150 per day that somebody's out of compliance. So if we find that a rental property has been rental for maybe a year and has never registered, just do the math on
$50,000.
Yeah. So I don't know that. I know since I've been in the clerk's office for about a little over, not quite 6 years, we've never sent a bill to anybody for that amount, or even, it would be ridiculous. So, you know, that's where we are with that database right now. There's just a lot of information in there. And it would, I don't know the amount of man hours it would take to go through that and try to clean it up. I mean, we've looked at it and it is a monumental task to try to figure out where to even start with it. And again, I think, you know, if there was something that was on an annual basis, it probably could be maintained much better, but just a one-time registration. And a couple of years ago, we did go and we would do like 10% of the properties on there, and we would send them a request to give us updated information. We'd get a lot of them back just because we don't have a valid address any longer. We got some comments back from people that it was supposed to be a one-time registration and we weren't supposed to bother them again about it. So, you know, we did try to make an attempt to each year do a percentage of them and try to get it verified and try to get updated information, but it is a difficult task.
I was gonna say, I think we've had a good discussion. Without, you know, reviewing everything we've discussed, I think we've come to some consensus, and I think at this point, maybe with the city manager, what would be the next step in terms of, one of the things I think we need to do is just get some very specific objectives for that balance, you know, this thing between tenants and landlords in terms of a rental property program. I mean, that'll drive a lot of the, what's actually put in an ordinance, you know, to implement this program. But, and generally I think we know what the objectives are, but we might want to drill down a little bit to really incorporate or address some of these things that we've heard tonight from the citizens. So.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of the direction I was looking for, from what I hear from the commission. Provide some more information about sort of the city taking in-house this, the rental, program that is now done by the Sisters of Charity, figuring out how we would do it, what we would focus on, what would be the parameters, of that, and then, looking what would be involved in a licensing program. Is there any other pieces, but those are the two areas that we were gonna move forward with.
And I agree with Commissioner Dedeke that we need to go slowly and be very thorough. We need to look at all the unintended consequences, and there's gonna be many unintended consequences that are gonna develop, but we should try to anticipate as many as possible. What sounds, oh, this is good, this is gonna solve everything, and then you open up all these other problems, which, you know, isn't good for the landlords, the tenants, for the city staff, etc. Okay. Well, for those of you in the audience, obviously this isn't our first discussion. We'll be discussing it more. I'm sure there'll be more study sessions. We're nowhere near taking final action. So thank you for being here, and thanks for all your input. So next item is, and you're all welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. Next item is presentation of the 2019 to 2023 capital improvement plan, what we commonly refer to as the CIP.
Mr. Mayor and Commission, I thoroughly presented the CIP and all the items at the November 6th City Commission study session. There were a few minor items that were addressed after that meeting. Those included that we changed our funding for the Stubby Park or other location. I think the general consensus was we're going to look at this at a study session probably in January about looking at potential other locations. We're not tied to Stubby Park, but that's just how it's titled in the CIP. Splitting the cost of that between the CIP and the transient guest tax. And that cost is based on the Stubby Park location because you have to bore electricity under 4th Street. So if we moved it somewhere else, potentially the cost would come down. But we did that to reduce that cost. Renovation of the library restrooms has been added in 2020 for an amount of $25,000. We have some pretty competent estimates that it would be about $12,000 per bathroom to do a full new tile, new partitions, new fixtures, paint, lighting, to give those bathrooms a more welcoming feel at the library. A spray park has been added but left unfunded. The significance of that is now it's a priority item for staff to bring it back at a study session. We're not going to put a dollar amount to it, not going to put a year to it, but just bring some pictures, some potential locations, what's involved, to just give the commission and the public some more information. Havens Park restrooms and associated improvements have been added for 2022. We did go back to the presentation Steve Grant did and some of the numbers. The number that we had provided, I think off the cuff last week or at the November 6th was 97,000. It's 194,000 because it was the commission's direction at that time to do the restroom portion, which is the 94,000, but there was $100,000 worth of lighting, parking lots, access points, ADA accessibility, which you have to have out there if you're gonna have a restroom. It has to be accessible, and there has to be a parking lot associated with that. And then I don't say housekeeping, but we won't have the first bond payment of Thornton Street in 2019. It'll be moved to 2020. The remainder of the recommended 2019 to 2023 CIP appears as it was initially recommended. If there's any other comments, we can address those. Otherwise, it will come back to the commission for final adoption before the end of the year, probably next week. And as a reminder, any item over $25,000 will again come before the commission for approval. So you're not approving all of these projects. You're just approving staff to work toward those projects and bring them back to you.
Any comments, commissioners, on the CIP? Commissioner Wilson?
Yes, I actually had one. I know that we was actually looking to do the renovation of the public library bathroom in 2020, but I was actually seeing if we could possibly do it in 2019. I know it was, we were inquiring about where we're gonna get the funds from, but I see that we're gonna split the cost on the Stubby Park side with the transit guest tax fund, so I was actually wondering if we could use that portion, the other half that we were gonna use toward the restroom, and that way we can actually do it in 2019.
What was the math that we talked about on this one?
We'd be okay dollar-wise doing that if it was the direction of the commission to move it forward to 2019.
I think that it's a modicum of cost. I mean, cost is cost, but I think that based on what Mr. Wilson just laid out, I'd be supportive of that, just to get it done. I mean, you've heard some, I've been in there, you've been in there, you've heard some, from some of your constituents, that I think I would be in favor of taking action in 2019 rather than waiting till 2020 because of what I just talked about and what you laid out, Mr. Wilson.
Commissioner
I'll
Decky?
go with the majority.
Yeah, we've got a consensus that we'll try to move up the library bathroom in 2019.
Okay.
And that'll, we'll finalize, this will come back to us next week possibly.
Yep, for formal adoption.
And once again, when those bids come in, if they're less than 25,000, Mr. Kramer can make that call.
Yeah, anything less than 25,000 you won't see, but anything over.
Anything more than 25,000, Mr. Kramer will bring, we have to decide. Okay, yes, sir.
I had one other thing on page 28 where we had unfunded. I think that, you know, we just talked about one of them, the library bathroom renovations. But, and there was the other one about security cameras at park restrooms. And I know we're not gonna do that on any extensive basis yet, but have we given any thought maybe to doing like a, I don't know, a pilot program with, where was the restroom that was replaced? Was that at Doherty Park or was that at, or was that at Cody Park? I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, there is, and I don't know how much we're talking about, but there's $10,515. Is that something we would want to do on a pilot basis if we think, just to see whether it would be a deterrent with respect to, you know, hopefully, you know, deterring any further damage to, you know, vandalism to the restrooms in the parks, but.
I think so, but then you have to go back to preceding pages.
See what we got left.
Not what we have left. We've got these, what we're planning on funding.
Sure.
Where do you want to take that? What do you want to
If you were looking at a pilot program of just one camera that we could.
Oh, not the whole 10 grand.
That we could see how it worked
Yeah.
with some signage, then you wouldn't need to approve that in the CIP. We could do that through
You
operations.
can do that, okay, I was thinking.
I mean, it's a little step, but I don't know.
You don't even.
Chief, care to speak on this one?
Mr. Mayor, Commission, that would fall under the allowable expenses for drug seizure funds. And
Yeah.
so if it's an amount of $2,000 or $3,000, there's those funds available as an option. If you want to discuss a pilot program of 1 or 2 locations in the community, I think we can figure out how to fund that.
And then you and the city manager can work together where, let's not put it someplace where we don't have any, you know, place that we determine that probably need some security cameras.
We could let you know through the CIM when we put it up, and then,
Yeah.
you know, check back later, six weeks later, how,
Okay.
if it's been effective.
Do it on 5.
Something like that.
And that's good use of it.
Well, I got a question on,
Yes,
are
sir.
these cameras concealed or are they?
It's a good point.
Well, we talk about that,
They were
and let you
in-
know.
No, it's a
Yeah.
good point. It's, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Any other questions, comments on CIP? If not, we'll move on to the presentation of the state legislative agenda for 2019. We have it's a luncheon schedule, correct?
Yes, December 7th at noon. We've sent invitations out to all of our state senators, some who don't even represent our area, but everybody in the area, state senators and state representatives. We usually get between 3 and 5, depending on schedules and how it goes. Mr. Mayor and Commission, every year the City Commission adopts a state legislative agenda. One thing that we do, as you know, that most other cities don't do, is we do a federal legislative agenda as well, having our federal partners in town. So you'll see in the League of Kansas Municipalities, they have federal items. We don't usually address their federal items. We come up with our own federal items due to the uniqueness of our community. But each year, the League of Kansas Municipalities has 120 or so items of interest. It's so numerous because they represent every city in the state of Kansas, small, large, so they cover it. We have in the past adopted the whole thing, and I would encourage us to do that again tonight. But as I started a couple years ago, pulled out 19 items that I know that the commission has indicated through formal comment, public comment, or informal discussions over the last year. And I'll just go through those briefly. For the first time this year, too, I did add 2 items or 2 concepts that were not included in the league's policy statement. I'm not sure why, but they didn't include mental health. And I know the commission has been very vocal about mental health. There's a task force created that 2 commissioners, myself and the police chief, sit on. And it's been an issue in the community. So for the first item, I did include the city commission and community at large. Support state action to restore mental health funding and services to Leavenworth County. The burden to local governments to deal with the effects of mental health are overwhelming and impact residents and businesses and hinder local government's ability to provide public services. So I won't read all the narrative for all 19, but I want to make sure that was included. And now transportation, that was one that I sort of combined some of the state ones and then added specifically a clause toward the end, the implementation of innovative techniques to preserve and improve traffic flow on K7. I think that needs to be a clear priority for the city of Leavenworth. The other things I called out, home rule, consistent with the home rule amendment, the Kansas Constitution, support local elected officials making decisions for their communities, particularly local tax and revenue decisions. City elections continue to remain nonpartisan and separate from state and national elections. And that's the league's language, so I think the league would favor moving them back to the spring. I don't know what the appetite for this at the legislature, something to talk with our local representatives about.
I'm going to weigh in on this one. I know Mr. Kramer and I have talked about this often. As most of you know, the city elections, the school board elections used to be held in April. And let's say April 5th was the election, Tuesday, April 5th was the election for city commission, Tuesday, April 12th, whoever got voted in took their seats. School board, they had the election April 5th, they didn't go till July 1st. A couple years ago, the very partisan legislature said we need to move these elections in November to get more people. I had discussions with one of the state senators at the time. I think Mr. Kramer, was Mr. Miller's office at the time, said, all you're doing here is taking this step, then you want to make it partisan the next year. And then he kind of admitted, we want to make them partisan because we think that we should announce whether you're Republican or Democrat. I think the appetite for making them partisan now is gone, but having them in November, I think, is almost ludicrous. We have city commissioners now. We have 3 seats that are up next year, mine, Commissioner Dedeke, and Commissioner Bowders. We will open up in January people filing for that commission seat. I have until June, so the campaign will start in January. Then in June it shuts down. Then we wait a little over 2 months for the primary election. If there's more than 2 spots per seat, there's 7 or more, is it 7 or more, 9 or more?
9.
9, okay, 10 or more, then we have to have a primary in August. And then that gets weeded down to 6 or whatever it is. And then we got 2.5 more months when we go in November. So now you have a campaign season for city commission going from January through November, and they don't seat until the following January. Now that's great for the state legislature. They are in session January through April, then an emergency session, come back in May. Close them off in June. They're not in session. They have their primary in August and then their general in November, but they're not in session. They can't do you any harm. We're sitting here, let's say the 3 of us decide not to run. We got 3 lame ducks basically for a year. Or let's say that all 3 of us run and we all get primaried out in August. We've got 5 months of lame ducks and possibly bitter lame ducks. This thing should move much, much quicker. The people want good representation, they want it quick. I'm gonna talk with our local representatives and see if there's any appetite for them to move it back to April and do it in the process we did it before. So I don't think the citizens are being represented properly.
How did the timeline work when it was in April, when you had, if you needed a primary? How did that work?
They did January 25th, I'm grabbing a date, it opened up January 1st, January 5th, or something like that. And January 25th would close off. If it determined they needed a primary, we did it either the last week in February or the first week in March. And then 30 days later, in April 5th, we did that thing. I went bang, bang, bang. First couple elections I was in, that's the way it worked. And it worked very well. And you were elected on April 5th. April 12th, you came in and took your seat. Now, you're elected on November 6th, you're still 60 days before 75 days.
If there are new people elected, though, there's not much under your, going back to the way it was, there's not much time for a transition for any new candidates that might come in and I mean, that was one of the benefits of kind of what we did in 2017 in terms of.
I think most candidates in the past that threw their hat in the ring in January would start attending meetings and maybe have meetings with the city manager to kind of understand the process. And for the most part, the ones that did do that would tend to get elected more than one that said, I don't know, I'll figure it out when I get there. But yeah, there's little to be said for that, but personal responsibility of a person running for office would take that. But having almost a year-long, it's 10-month campaign season and a year-long potentially lame ducks. If I decide not to run, or Commissioner Dedeke decides not to run, or Commissioner Bowder, they're lame ducks basically for a year, and that's not good government in my opinion. And I know what the reason why the state legislature did it at the time. They wanted to make it partisan, but those days are gone. But I'm going to talk with, I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I'm personally going to talk with some state legislatures and legislators and see if, let's go back what it was. The numbers, the weak argument, we're having November because people like to vote in November, and it was weak. It was.
Was there any increase in voter participation? Do we know from?
I don't know right offhand. I think it was about the same.
From 2015 to 2017.
I don't have the numbers in front of me either, but I don't remember a huge spike.
Yeah, and you get the same issues with the school board, and they moved just the school board and city elections were all the basic ones, and those are the only 2 elections in the state that are nonpartisan, but they wanted, at that point, there was a supermajority of a certain group that said we need to make everything partisan.
Did they really open up that window in which people can declare? I know 1 June was, in 2017, was the last day that could be done, but are the previous 4 or 5 months, is that a window when people can?
You'll open it up in January.
Is it opened up in January?
The county clerk actually is the one that opens it up because everybody files with the county now, even for local elections. So she kind of determines the date. There isn't anything in the statute that says it has to be opened by a certain date. So it's just
it's usually in the first week or 2 of January.
Well, yeah, I don't know if we. I think that's too early, to tell you the truth, but I mean, I'm just a product of my experience in terms of 2017,
But people want to start their politicking early, and, you know, they want to get their name, they file, paper picks up on it, and they
should
start.
we, I mean, if we wanted to, is that something that the county commission votes on, or in terms of that date, or is it something that the clerk determines herself?
County clerk is an elected official, I think she makes that determination.
And like I said, there's nothing in the state statute that says it has to be open on a certain date. So she has a little bit of flexibility there, just to be able to get all the documents ready for people to start coming in and filing.
Yeah,
Well, let's say you make it 30 days, let's say May 1st, I think that's too short, but
Sure.
May 1st and it closes
Right.
June 1st, you're still looking
Right.
at 8.5 months of lame
Yeah,
duck.
it's better than a year, but I hear you, I hear what you're saying.
And just a campaign season for,
Right.
the only people that like campaigns are the printers that, you know, you don't do TV ads, I mean, the people that make money from it. And it's, for those of us that have campaign, if you say you enjoy campaigning, yeah, it's.
Well, I'm not happy with a year's, but I just bring that up.
I'm not
in
having
terms
8.5 months, I like
Yeah.
the 3-month process, let's get it moving, and it worked fine in this state, in this city, it worked fine for 50 years, 100 years, however long it was, and now making everyone a political animal for a year is just ludicrous in my opinion, but that's my thoughts, so. Okay, Mr. Kramer.
Yeah, sign regulation of public right-of-way, again, this goes back to the issue we talked about earlier, allowing local governments to regulate the right-of-way. Intergovernmental dialogue, this is about communication and communicating between all levels of government. They have a couple of these good faith type clauses in the league's policy each year. Infrastructure, two important things for the city of Leavenworth, a comprehensive transportation program supporting full funding, oppose any use of transportation funds to balance the state's general fund budget, which has been done quite a bit in the past. Any reduction in funding jeopardizes existing programs. Connecting links, again, the city sitting with multiple state highways within our boundaries takes advantage of these cost share programs that the state offers for our state highways, and we would ask that they be fully funded. Tax lid, so the league and its members support the repeal of the tax lid. Again, this goes back to home rule. If a constituency is not in favor of a property tax increase, then at the next election, they have the right to vote out those members who increase those property taxes. If the repeal of the tax lid does not occur, the cost of elections and timing of the budget approval process in coordination with such an election make the tax lid unfeasible. We would support removing the election process under the tax lid and replacing it with a protest petition. Just quickly, now if you raise your property tax or you collect, it's not even raising your property taxes. If your assessed value goes to a level that you collect a certain amount more,
2%.
then you have to bring it before the electorate. Where this would say, if it brings it a certain amount more, then somebody would have to do a protest petition. So it'd put the onus on somebody else rather than the governing body. And most of the time that growth, a new subdivision, a new business development, now needs to be serviced by your police department, your code enforcement department, your building department. So that growth helps pay for the services that it uses. And that's the argument that local governments make is, that's a good thing if you have growth, but it also means you have a larger service area to cover. Internet sales tax collections, this is moving in the right way, the right direction. I'm certainly not an expert on all of these, but there's been some Supreme Court law about internet vendors remitting sales tax. The city does receive quite a bit of internet sales tax currently, most of it on a voluntary basis. Amazon, you'll collect sales tax off that, and there's some further legislation the state can do so that you capture all of that sales tax. Again, it's a revenue source, but it also protects the brick and mortar stores that operate in your community. So everybody's playing on a level playing field. Property tax exemptions, I think some of the commissioners have been around a while, have seen multiple pieces of legislation that aim to reduce property tax burdens on certain industries, thereby by eroding the tax base of a city. So we support a broad tax base and believe the existing property tax base should be protected. Alternative revenue sources, this would include items such as our stormwater fee that the city is empowered to put in place. Tax credits, abatement, and increment financing. The support the city's ability to do that type of economic development incentives with tax increment financing, CIDs, NRAs, Neighborhood Revitalization Acts, which we've used to great success here in the city of Leavenworth. Asset forfeiture, the chief can talk about this if you want any more information. There's been a couple attempts by the legislature, pieces of legislation that haven't gone through, whereby cities wouldn't benefit from those asset forfeitures. They may be going to some sort of state fund, or there may be other laws put in place that take those funds from the city. Municipal utilities and personnel, municipal operations, the abilities of cities to operate municipal gas, water, electric, sewer, telecommunications, broadband, solid waste, stormwater, and other utility services. We further support the ability of cities to set and control the rates for locally owned and operated utilities and support the current defined service territory statutes. Obviously, the city does stormwater, we do sewer. So we would continue with that. Solid waste is particularly relevant to us. The home rule powers of cities to dispose and manage the municipal solid waste should not be restricted. There's always sort of a lobby that you're taking from the private industry on that, but we believe that we should be able to manage our own municipal solid waste. Weapons and firearms, again, a remnant from the last couple of years, support local ability of governments to set policies regarding the carrying of weapons and firearms by municipal employees while they're engaged in their work. Capers and KP&F, supporting full funding. Police safety and community improvement. Body cameras support the ability of local governments to determine when and how body cameras will be used by law enforcement officers, and the establishment of reasonable regulations concerning public access to recordings, balancing the needs of law enforcement and the individuals whose images are captured in the recordings. This has become a big area, a great area of concern, and I know in our police department, about what body camera footage is treated as. Is it the same as other evidentiary, and I'm getting out over my skis, and Pat can talk about this a little bit, but how and when do we show body camera footage? I think we need some clarification on that. So those are the city's 19 items. I want to just further reinforce that these do not limit us to these 19. The value, the commission passing these kind of twofold. We present these to our city, our representatives, to let them know that we support all the league issues, but these are the ones that we're really focused on. However, that changes through a fluid legislative cycle. And the other part is it allows the city manager to submit written or oral testimony if bills come up. The commission gave direction a couple years ago that if time allows, and I want to write a letter of support based on something you've supported, I bring it to the next commission meeting. However, these things are pretty fluid, so if I find out on a Wednesday that there's a hearing on a Friday for an item that the city supported, then I have the ability to write a letter of support on behalf of the city commission for a certain piece of legislation. But again, if at all possible, I try to bring those to the city commission. So that's why we pass it. It sort of authorizes me to speak on behalf of the city for those items, which I will always, of course, copy you on that.
Any questions or comments from Mr. Bennett? Mr. Griswold?
This is focused on our state legislators?
Yes.
Okay. And there is a difference between state and federal, and I noticed that in that packet that you gave us from the League of Kansas Municipalities, under the federal thing, they had some good language on stormwater, but it is at the federal level. But since we've spent a lot of time as a commission on stormwater, so probably not applicable to this if it's more federal. Do we do something with
we do a whole separate process for our federal legislature than just
that's fine. Yep. The other thing, I think these are good. My own thing is that there are 19 of them. So is there any prioritization that the commission wishes to talk about, or maybe provide to the city manager?
I think there were 75.
120.
120,
Yep.
and so they got 19 of the most salient ones,
and my guess is of the 19, 10 or 12 won't even come up this session, and that's the mystery, is what's gonna bubble up. So Commissioner Wilson asked me, and I meant to say, how do we monitor the session for the people watching, and to let you know, we're members of the League of Kansas Municipalities. They send out legislative alerts, they send out information to us. The chief is a member of the Association of Police Chiefs. Carla is a member of the City Clerks Association. All send out relevant information. newsletters from our representatives. Hopefully, some of the content is based on what our priorities are. And then just general information from newspapers, and our colleagues, Taylor and I, working some legislative issues, monitor what goes on during the session.
I will say the league is very good about keeping city manager, assistant city manager, clerk, and police chief, those organizations saying, here's an issue they're talking about today, and I think you'd be of interest. So
The only other thing well, there's two things. On the items not included in the League of Kansas Municipalities policy statement, mental health, very good. I was just thinking, I know that we have a little bit more in the way of data to, that maybe we could, in terms of what the police chief has talked to us about and you've talked to us about in the year that I've been on the commission, just to give them a little bit, kind of the scope of the challenge, at least with that particular item, might be helpful on that one.
And that's a good point. How we would typically handle that is we would produce our own more detailed memo and send it to them, because they actually want data and want proposed legislation and more information. But
That's how that one would be handled.
That's how we
Okay,
would do
and the only other thing, one more, is at the bottom of page 32, abandoned and blighted housing, I would add abandoned and blighted housing and commercial structures. Now, they make mention in term later in the paragraph about commercial structures, but I would put it up in the title.
Sure.
That's it, Mr. Mayor, for my input.
any other comments? No. December 7th, noon or 11:30, whatever, it's Friday, December 11th, 7th for a luncheon. Okay, any other items? Commissioner Dedeky?
No, I have done.
Commissioner Griswold?
No, I look forward to tomorrow. I understand you did another podcast with the city manager.
Yeah,
So,
city manager and I did a podcast yesterday, didn't I? Monday.
So
Yeah,
when I see
yesterday.
I think it's good. I haven't had time. Was it posted earlier today? But I look forward to listening to it, and I do tell constituents to go on our website and list. There's good information in those podcasts about what's going on with their city
And I
government.
want to thank Mr. Kramer, who sets them all up, and Jake Potter, the PAO, our Director of Public Relations at the school district, and help the school district give us. Do you have anything, Commissioner?
No, sir.
I just want to mention that we had a very successful Christmas parade and tree lighting ceremony. Thank you to all that did that. Parks and Rec was instrumental in it, and I don't know what the crowd was, 750, 1,000? Right, 1,000?
750,000?
750 to 1,000. You need my hearing aid.
I missed that.
But yeah, I remember last year, one of the years it was very cold, and there's still 1,000 people down there. I mean, they come down there, and it's just a good event. Kids have a great time, and it's great. I'd like to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. We have much to be thankful for. I hope that you have a good, safe Thanksgiving, get together with family, and enjoy the day. So with that, no other business, we are adjourned. Thank you.